Well, good afternoon, good morning, or good evening, depending upon where you are in the world, and welcome to today's Security Boulevard webinar. I'm Charlene O'Hanlon, moderator for today's event, and I welcome you. We have a great webinar on tap, as always, but before we get started, we do have a few housekeeping items we need to go over. First of all, today's event is being recorded, so if you miss any or all of the event, you will have the opportunity to access it later on. Following today's webinar, we will be sending out an email that contains a link to access the webinar on demand. And we are taking questions from the audience. So if at any time during today's presentation you have a question for either of our speakers, please don't wait, don't hesitate. Just use that question and answer tab on your interface and submit your questions. And we'll try to get to as many as we can near the end of today's webinar. We also have a very interactive chat feature, so we encourage you to chat us your questions, comments, suggestions, whatever you want to share with us. We'll be more than happy to take your chats, and we might even chat you back. And then finally, at the end of today's webinar, we are doing a drawing for 4 $25 Amazon gift cards. So please stick around. Hopefully you'll be one of our 4 lucky winners. All right, with that, let's go ahead and kick off today's webinar, which is Securing the Path to Cloud Migration and Development. Our speakers today are Ben Grissinger, who is a cloud evangelist at Tufin, and Jonathan Campbell, who's a technical product manager for cloud at Tufin. Gentlemen, thank you so much for joining me today. Really appreciate it. Jonathan, I know you're going to be kicking us off conversation-wise, so I'm going to put myself off, put myself on mute, and then just let you get right to your presentation, and I'll be back on when we get to the question and answer period.
Great. Thank you very much, Charlene. That was a very nice intro. So, as you can see, this presentation is about securing the path to cloud migration and development. So we'll move on to the first slide. Okay, so originally people started moving to the cloud for the potential cost savings. They started to lift and shift what they had in their own data centers and place them into the cloud. However, the real advantage is the agility. The cloud enables companies to deploy their products faster. They're able to streamline the whole production process. The power and the flexibility that the cloud provides in terms of the auto-scaling, the self-service, and the programmatic interfaces has led to a reduction in the time it takes to bring products to market. So this is a huge opportunity for companies willing to take advantage of these services, because not only can they deliver faster, but they can also reduce the cost at the same time. So data centers are expensive to run, and including the cost of staffing them, obviously. So moving to the cloud has enabled a reduction in both of these costs. The on-demand usage means that there is no longer a need to build in excess capacity into your environment for the peaks in traffic. And also the pay-as-you-go model or the pay-as-you-use model offers great savings to organizations. The shift from OPEX to CAPEX has provided organizations with a great deal of financial flexibility also. However, companies need to be aware that whatever tools they're using, they also need to provide agility, cost reduction, and security. If the tools that they're using don't provide all of these, then they need to be changed. So we get to the problem statement as we see it. Organizations want to go faster, but tackle point projects rather than looking at the bigger picture. Previously, there was a lot of emphasis placed on vulnerability scans and static code scans and lots of other scans. And yes, these are absolutely needed and must be done. But they also tend to focus on point solutions like just tackling AWS. But applications span multiple environments. Typically, they're not cloud native or cloud only and can use resources from on-prem or from other cloud vendors. If they protect only one at a time, then they will very quickly lose sight of the rest of the bigger picture. So this begs the question, why do they do this? Well, history. If they're familiar with firewalls and they're not familiar with the cloud, then they stick with what they know, and they're familiar with firewalls. So this is not to say that the use of firewalls is wrong. Perimeter firewalls should be used whether protecting public cloud or clusters in Kubernetes. But bear in mind that in the case of Kubernetes and Kubernetes, the Kubernetes policy is a must, and it must be aligned with the firewalls, or the apps will break or perhaps be even overexposed. This can be difficult then for network firewall teams to address as they lack the visibility, and equally difficult for the applications teams as they have no control over the firewalls. And it's not typically part of their role to secure their applications, and also they're not the security experts. Ben, do you want to add anything to this?
Yeah, that's great. It's a great coverage, Jonathan. That is something we see often in our travels. Uh, I often refer to it as these are two different personas that are speaking different languages and have different practices. So definitely, this is certainly point on the problem statement. Thanks. Thank you.
Great, thank you. So, misconfigurations can happen for a number of reasons, but they can typically be broken down into one of four categories or perhaps a combination. So, lack of visibility is absolutely number one. An inability to see what is talking to what and who is talking to whom, what the connectivity and access is. It's a huge problem and it can lead to guesswork. Even if this is an educated guess or even a reliance on the other team will get it right, it still leads to misconfigurations. So, not surprisingly, there is a huge skills gap in the cloud as well. New terminology, new ways of working, new methodologies, these all contribute to people without the correct skill set making changes based on incorrect knowledge. These are the people who are making changes to the fragmented on-prem and hybrid clouds, coupled with a lack of visibility. And of course, we can't forget the human error side of things on top of all of this. Things can easily be misconfigured, as highlighted in numerous stats from other analysts, like 99% of all security breaches are a cause of end-user misconfiguration. It's not surprising then when you consider the number of controls and how complex they are, and also the interrelationship of those security controls. In a cloud environment, we're talking about VPC settings, security group settings, IAM policy, and WAF settings. All of this together tells you which resources or assets are actually exposed. And this is far more difficult than managing a firewall with a certain IP address or port exposed. There are a lot more moving parts, and the guys configuring this are not necessarily the security experts. So we need a way for these groups to collaborate. So an example of this, so if we break this down, traditional security teams only have the visibility of the on-prem environment. Okay, they can see some of the third-party firewalls and the security groups at the perimeter of the cloud. And if I take the example of one of my financial services customers, they were building a cloud-native application. However, in reality, only the front end was hosted in the cloud, and a lot of the other resources were actually on-prem. So we saw a familiar pattern where we have an app that spans on-prem and cloud environments. The traditional security teams, as they traditionally have, set up an ITSM such as ServiceNow, and they manage the firewalls, even those in the cloud. But then you have the cloud team that manages the deployments of applications, maybe using Terraform for infrastructure as code, making it really easy to spin up new apps or change a config from just a config file. You have the situation where the cloud team are managing the setting and the setting up of the environment, and this includes some of the security controls too. But this leads to the two teams managing the security across on-prem and the cloud, and neither of them collaborating or not connecting. So traditionally, security can only see what's on-prem and the firewall configuration, even if a virtual firewall is deployed into the cloud. They don't get to see the east-west traffic or the proper segmentation of an app in a VPC or a VNet. Even those terms can go right over their heads, depending on how new they are to cloud. So if the security team only has this level of visibility, they can't assure the business that the application is actually safe. If you think everything is safe behind a firewall, but then you see yourself on the news and it's your bucket or your Elasticsearch that was exposed because someone misconfigured it, and it wasn't actually behind a firewall, as the traditional firewall teams can't see it, then it all adds up to a significant business problem. On the other hand, you've got the cloud team who can see things like the cloud native security controls, the security groups, the NSGs, the ASGs, IAM policies. What we see though is that the app teams tend to configure these controls broadly, as their focus is making sure the app works, and they expect the security teams to take care of the security by pointing it at a firewall and setting up all of the rules for it. For those that are familiar with tufin, you'll know that traditionally we have talked to the left-hand side of the slide that you can see here. The traditional network security teams who look after the firewalls and access to the cloud. As previously mentioned, these are often the same people who are tasked with securing the cloud. On the right-hand side, we can see the cloud security team. They're responsible for all things inside the cloud. So these two teams, respectively, are able to cover the security aspects of the cloud and inside the cloud. But there is a need for them to collaborate. Without communication between the two teams, there is a greater potential for misconfigurations. Ultimately, the CISO has responsibility for both of these teams. They need to make sure that these teams are in sync and working closely together to mitigate any errors and misalignments in the security policy. This ultimately is where tufin comes in, and we're able to provide visibility across the on-prem to the cloud, and then continue that visibility into the cloud. Ben, is there more that you would like to add to this slide?
Yeah, I think this is a very important slide. This is probably one of the highlights of the conversation today. What we traditionally see when you're migrating or moving to cloud is the organization structure is not very mature. We actually see many different variants of this particular org chart, for example. It's not often we see that there is a cloud security unit. Maybe it's just one security unit trying to cover the massive spans of on-prem and cloud. Yeah, another part of this is just the literal scale and size of the cloud platforms and the services that are being used. And you also have the security teams, like you said, are maybe not familiar with these cloud platforms and all these different services that could be used. It still offers a big gap, right? So we spend a lot of our time trying to understand the organization's organizational structure, because we believe that Tufin's suite of products can carry both from on-premise and up in the cloud. Right? So our portfolio of products should essentially cover those gaps or help security teams move the way into the cloud, but also help the developers move the way back to the security teams, where we're trying to enhance that collaboration experience. So yeah, this is a very good slide. Thanks, Jonathan. Thank you. If I may, John, if I may take it forward here.
Absolutely, yes.
Yeah. So this is kind of what I was describing. On the left-hand side, we have Jonathan, for example, could be a security person. Myself, however, my professional career is more to the dev side. And a lot of times when we speak to customers, the cloud, is there a separation of duties? Like that happens quite often, where these teams that are actually working on premise and have great practices and great posture built, and typically what they want to do is they want to move that to the cloud, meaning they want to continue to do what they've done best, and they want to continue that on in the cloud. The problem is when you get into cloud, as Jonathan mentioned earlier, there are different resources. There literally are assets without IPs, so there's no way to put them behind a traditional firewall. And also, you'll see that the rate of change, things that are happening in cloud in some of these Kubernetes clusters can be running for milliseconds, and then they're gone. Right. So the challenge becomes, how do we take these two personas that are traditionally separated, not really, security is not really an app owner's responsibility, and vice versa, where now we're actually trying to take this information that we gather from our platform and provide that. We're doing translations from the cloud side and handing it to security. It's almost like a translation. We're giving them the views that they need to see, that makes them feel more comfortable, that we have compliance in place, we have policies in place. They're going to keep us within these guardrails. And likewise, we're trying to introduce the app owners and the developers and DevOps to means of automation. We understand that that's their goals. That's what they're trying to do. They're trying to go fast. We're trying not to be prohibitive. We're not getting in the way. We're trying to basically carry security into those automation and those speed-driven workflows. Right. So there's essentially two kinds of workflows we're dealing with here. We have automation done with Terraform Ansible. We have automation done with workflow ticketing processing systems. And that's where we typically like to spend a lot of our time understanding customer needs, because Tufin's suite orchestration suite of products can support both of those scenarios. Okay, next. So the question becomes then really about how do we provide visibility for the security and network folks, right? How do we actually share with them these views of this visibility? And then once you get the visibility, how do you give them the means to maintain it? How do you do audits? If you have to do change requests, those kinds of processes, that's what Tufin has done very well, very traditionally, but now it's being carried into the cloud. And on the other side of the coin is the DevOps process is trying to tie them into network operations. What's a typical process for DevOps? Well, typically they deploy through code very fast using Terraform, Ansible, other products. So our challenge is, how do we present this very, very fast moving environment in a very visible, understandable form to the security network people, right? So how do we basically make the visibility or work together, or the collaboration story together with both of these traditionally separate personas? Okay, so if you're looking from a traditional standpoint of a network engineer or a security person, they're looking literally at these subscriptions, basically VPCs. When you're up in cloud, you have these networks. And you also want to make sure the perimeters of those networks have firewalls. You're basically controlling north-south flows inside those networks. You also want to make sure that people coming in and leaving, coming to and leaving the network are validated, they're known, and they're trusted, right? And meanwhile, while you're doing all this, it's essential that you eliminate, those gaps. Things like these overly permissive rules. These are things that maybe a developer or an application owner wouldn't necessarily know. Something that security has a policy. So being able to codify the policy and being able to perform checks against that policy and doing it earlier rather than later is something that you really should strive to achieve. Next is also you should be able to demonstrate over time. Like today I'm compliant, but all of a sudden there was some drift somewhere in one of your cloud platforms. Now you're no longer compliant. And being able to identify what event took place that caused that drift so that it can be corrected and pulled back into the compliance shell. Okay. Obviously, we talked a little bit earlier about the benefits of automation. That's kind of what's transforming people, that's what's moving people to cloud. The ability to basically instantiate, I typically call it provisioning is like a thing of the past, where we're not really using, in the traditional ways. We used to send it tickets and requests, IT department, spin me up some VMs and build me some networks and build me some storage, and then I would wait for them to be done, and then I would actually go to work. Well, now today you basically build all that request out in code. You launch that request against a bunch of APIs in the cloud platform. It's done all for you, but what you've done essentially is bypass the whole process of, hey, is what I'm configuring legitimate, or am I in compliance, or am I violating some policies? Right? So that's the part of integration that we're trying to introduce to our customers, that we recognize this new provisioning method is something that's changing, and it does add business value. There's benefit to the business, being able to roll up these applications and scale them tremendous scale and speed. Trying to tie security into that process, it's humanly impossible to hire enough people to keep up with this pace. So that's where the automation piece comes into play. Okay. Next, Jonathan. I think this is somewhere we've seen this quite a bit. If you care to chat about this, I know we can talk about this ad nauseum for our folks here today, but if you care to pick up, just kind of explain this process.
Yeah, absolutely. So essentially what we were seeing here is when we were talking to one of our customers, they had a particular way of managing their environment. It was all a very manual approach. Essentially, they were adding new connections. They had two different teams that were having to create the code that they needed, but they had limited visibility. So it was very, very difficult for them to manage the creation of this policy, the testing of that policy. And these two teams essentially were working on different areas of the CI/CD pipeline. So team A, they would create and test the code. Then this would need to go to their team B, and then they would test it and they would verify it from there. At which point then each team would need to make sure that they had a security policy in place, which is what they had to create themselves. And that could be anything from hundreds of lines of code to thousands of lines of code. And so essentially this would be a very long and drawn out process. But once they'd created that, they would then upload the policies to their respective Git branches. they'd validate the work, and then essentially they'd then merge that into one place. So they'd be adding all these new connections, they'd be creating the policy, they'd be testing each other's work essentially. Then once it's completed by both teams, they then needed to deploy this and test it, and then make sure that it was put into the dev environment. Ultimately, then they could get that into production. And the problem that we were seeing here as well is they were doing a lot of this work. And as you can see here, as shown on the slide, security is like the last measure. So the developers were doing all of this good work and they were putting all this effort in and they were testing all their work. But security were only getting to see this towards the end. And so they were being seen as a huge block, a blocker to the developers, and they're getting their application from that build phase in the CI/CD pipeline all the way through to production. They would do all the work, put lots and lots of effort in, and then security would come in and say, there are so many mistakes here against the policy which you've never seen. And so there needs to be lots and lots of changes made. And so it would be then sent back, and they would either have to start again or essentially spend a long time fixing the problem so that security were happy with it before it got moved into production. So this was a very slow and long drawn out process. If I sort of hand over to you, Ben, for this next piece, this is, sorry, carry on.
No, let's go ahead. I was just, can you maybe go back a slide, please? I was just curious. I had a question for you, Jonathan. With respect to our customers, it's almost a question for the attendees. I'd be interested to hear, like from our customers, we ask them literally when new connections are added, like in this description, is it beneficial to the process to have these new connections validated at the time they occur? Or does it make sense to wait until you get down to the new production environment? So is that something, I think that's something that we need to spend a few minutes talking about, because I think that's where we see a lot of our contacts and our customers, they're trying to avoid detecting these issues as they get instantiated in production. They would rather see them occur earlier. In other words, at the time the new connection happens or the change happens, has that change or new connection been validated when it was actually deployed? It's almost, it's synonymous to IAC checks, but you need to have something a little bit more breadth than just an IAC check or two. You have a whole comprehensive set of policies, and these policy checks should take place at that time. Is that something you're seeing from your side of the pond as well? I mean, I think that's this is a very key point. I think we should spend a few more minutes on.
Yeah, it's absolutely something that we're seeing, and the customer was referring to that it was great for them to be able to see and validate the new connections, because they were, let's say the developer was writing the piece of code and they put out a connection to let's say somewhere external. They were happy with it, their app worked, they moved on. However, this was to get to the security validation later on and find out that connection to the external source was actually a violation of the policy, would send them all the way back. If they would state to us that if they could see that earlier, they could fix it there and then move forward much more quickly. And that saves a whole lot of time with the security process as well. It comes back to that whole shift left. You do a small iterative security check as and when they're working, and they're working to a set of guardrails. So as they're creating, they know that there's something that needs to be done. They can either fix it there and then, or if it's something like they need access and they don't have access, then they can raise a ticket, knowing that the ticketing process can take, it can take days, it could take weeks potentially for certain changes depending on the process. They know that they can carry on working, knowing that they've put that change in place, and so by the time they come to the production piece, that change has already been implemented, and so it's then not seen as a delay. That's essentially what I've been seeing. So yeah, seeing these connections earlier, getting the small iterative security checks in early has definitely been a benefit.
Yeah, and as in this connection, as this describes, and I guess it's not just getting a few checks in earlier, it's actually getting a comprehensive view. I noticed where your production line here is a lot smaller, meaning production, when you get to production, your customers are really starting to measure the deltas. You're not really doing initial measurements in production. You should be doing the initial measurements in pre-production and beyond, like shifting left. Is that correct?
Absolutely, yes. So
Okay.
by doing all that work up front, it greatly shortens that production security check.
Okay. Cool. Yeah, this is definitely so this is very common for the way you build automated workflows inside of cloud. Basically, you have this iterative process where it's continual. It's continual updates, continue releasing changes, continue releasing new apps. It's circular. It's not sequential. It's not very linear or horizontal. And it looks like we highlighted the use of APIs versus the use of a ticket. The key here is not every application in the enterprise is going to follow that workflow. The key is also you're going to see the traditional sense, like you have a hybrid application where you have maybe a portion of your deployment is a service that resides on premise, and there will be a need to generate a ticket and publish that ticket to a ticket processing system or workflow. Right? And being able to generate those kinds of workflows earlier on as well kind of gets you to where you can shorten that whole production risk. You can actually get more comprehensive views and sending those tickets over to on-premise when needed. And also you're not getting in the way of the cloud folks, those developer and app owners who need to have this instantiated through code. That's another pattern I think we can talk about a little bit, where there's essentially two different kinds of workflows here. I mentioned a little bit earlier that the idea is that we're trying to build solutions that cover, I typically call them two different languages. On-premise, having that network posture in place, north-south flows being managed with firewalls, very much traditional IP subnet port combinations. When you get to cloud, you're using a lot of tags. You're using a lot of labels. A lot of those assets don't have IPs. So how do you build policy against something like that? Is that something you can speak about, Jonathan, a little bit?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, that's exactly what we're seeing, and that's why it's very difficult for the security teams, the traditional security teams, to manage it. And so it comes back to what you were saying earlier around the collaboration that's absolutely necessary between the teams. But we are seeing a lot of our traditional security teams who are now being tasked with managing and securing the cloud and putting their name to it, not being able to see what's there, and so using some form of tool to give them that and understand, even get an understanding of some of the terms, absolutely is crucial to this.
Yep. So the ability to identify what a tag means. I've got a couple of assets over in cloud that maybe are storage buckets, and they're associated with an application, for example. In this case, maybe it's my CRM. Those buckets themselves, I don't really have a way to manage through a traditional means to put a policy from a firewall against those buckets. Right? That's something that's pretty common.
Mm-hmm.
So the ability to take those tags and then you can perform those checks in your policy engines as well, right? So you have policy engines that basically become the source of truth for your policies, and those policies can be leveraged earlier in your build stage. That's kind of essentially the gist of where we believe we have a chance to improve and also collaborate. Does that sound correct?
Yes, absolutely. The collaboration between the two teams and the traditional, as you said, IP subnet port combinations through to the cloud labels port, as well as obviously the networking within the cloud, giving you that ability to manage all of it and create policy around it. Yeah, it's key to moving forward.
Okay, cool. Awesome. Why don't we take you forward here, Jonathan? Go ahead and take us forward there. Please.
Okay, so this does lead very nicely into the tufin cloud story and how we're able to assist here. So tufin Secure Cloud is a network-centric cloud security posture management tool, and it is the newest addition to the tufin orchestration suite. It's part of the tufin cloud suite. So with Secure Cloud, enterprise security teams can gain critical insights into their cloud native or cloud optimized workloads in the public cloud. They can establish security policy guardrails and monitor compliance across all of the critical functions of cloud native applications, whether it be security, DevOps, cloud ops, and the development teams. Secure Cloud gives visibility into the public cloud assets and the Kubernetes clusters running both on-prem and in the public cloud. We have an open API architecture to integrate vulnerability products to gain insight into the security posture, as well as best practice and best policy guardrail development. It also provides industry benchmarks in the form of the CIS benchmark and best practice alerts and suggestions. It also gives application views across the public assets and also the Kubernetes clusters, both of which you can see examples of here. You're also able to establish security policy guardrails by automatically learning and generating native security policy for the Kubernetes clusters. You can segment workloads for the east-west as well as the north-south traffic to reduce the attack surface in public cloud, and create security policy across all environments, whether that's the on-prem, private cloud, or even the public cloud. So this also then leads to a continuous compliance with the ability to automate into the CI/CD pipeline with APIs. There are dashboards for reports and compliance and alerting to changes that have occurred in the environment. And finally, we do all of this without compromise. There is no control plane or agents introduced to enforce security policy, which means there is no extra compute required or cluster bloat that drives the performance down and equally drives the costs up. Cluster economics is something that needs to be considered when you are deploying these solutions, as the cost of running a security solution should not impact the cost of running the application itself. We use native API integration into the cloud automation pipelines to shift left the responsibility of the security to the developer teams, which is what we were referring to earlier. And this in turn ensures then that the developers are productive. It enhances their investment in the DevOps automation, and it's not blocking its benefits. It fixes the security policy violations early and often in the overall software development lifecycle. The overall benefit then is that it ensures the business benefits of moving to the cloud are not compromised by slow-moving security processes. It can actually accelerate the migration of workloads to the cloud by eliminating security and compliance concerns. Ben, if you want to talk about the next slide.
Sure. Okay. Great. So hopefully I get my screen share corrected here. Why is it doing this? Okay. So we've talked a lot about migration to cloud. We've talked a lot about the similarities and the dissimilarities between the two. In terms of Tufin's orchestration suite of products, the nice thing about the solution that really helps, it really does facilitate a path for what each organization might specifically want to maintain or keep in place. We're not prescriptive. We're not telling people that you must do it this way or that way. We are actually looking and listening to our customers' requirements, and we're actually in the product set supports those multitudes of different ways of building in automation, whether it's in cloud or whether it's in Kubernetes, whether you're implementing microsegmentation, whether you have in the cloud firewalls, or if you're using cloud native. Completely anonymous in this respect. We're not prescribing any tool sets that you must use. We don't prescribe certain firewalls. We're listening actually to what firewalls you actually have in place. Maybe you're more comfortable keeping them in place versus shifting to cloud native. It's really a journey, and that's kind of the key to the whole process. Is customers going to cloud have the option to go at the pace they want, and discuss using the Tufin suite of orchestration suite of products to help build policy to maintain your compliance requirements as you proceed through that journey into the cloud. So you can keep your existing processes in place, or you can also go all in on getting completely cloud native or somewhere in between. You really get the opportunity to leverage the suite of products. We also spend a significant amount of time showing our customers not just north-south, but east-west flows. We're very much all about getting security views earlier versus later. We prefer that method. It's recommended that you don't find out when you get to these late-stage environments in your SDLC that you've got issues, because typically what that really does is cause friction, slows things down. So if you implement a learning mode, which we call it learning mode in Tufin language speak, where you can actually get this visibility and compare it against policy early on, it helps you accelerate your journey to cloud with confidence. You actually have compliance checks that are more comprehensive than your traditional IAC checks. It gives you a broad view lets you see, if I deploy this into production, what is it going to, what issues are going to come up. We kind of eliminate that problem, showing up in production and having to go back to the well because so many things were wrong. We actually help the developer personas achieve that success in the lower level environments, so that when they do get to production, there's this inherent handshake between security and developer or app owners, that their applications are built to be secure and maintain compliance. Okay. And next, Jonathan, back to you. Why don't you take this, take the bridge?
Okay, so yeah, what we're talking about here is essentially the journey that we have within Secure Cloud. And so this goes back to the sort of the slide I was talking about earlier. You have the absolute need to gain visibility of what is in the environments. And this, so we're talking here about from the developer side of things, they need to understand how their application is working and be able to articulate that to security. The security and network teams need to be able to see what they're doing so that they can then set those policies. I mean, the thing to consider here is when we talk about the setting of the compliance policies, is these policies probably already exist within the environments. You know, they in some way, shape, or form they will exist. It's the way that the traditional security teams translate that so it's usable by the developers. You know, they don't have it, rather than having to understand and learn all of this new terminology. It comes back to that collaboration piece. If they collaborate with the developers and collaborate with the cloud operations teams, essentially they can continue doing what they're good at. They can create the security policy and allow then the developers and the cloud ops teams to get on with what they're good at. They're good at the cloud. They're good at developing. So this policy can be provided. The cloud and the developers teams can, implement those, and it means that everyone's working to the same compliance guardrails. We then have that ability then to give you the analysis of the environment. So we'll show you where there are risks within your environment that's understandable to the traditional team, so they can see risky ports perhaps that are in use, or maybe over permissive environments, and even down to whether you've got internet exposure. All of this together leads very nicely, as we were talking about earlier, to this app-driven automation. The use of this, or the introduction of security earlier and the shift left of security, the use of the APIs, the generation of the security policy for the Kubernetes clusters, for example, all lends itself to increasing the speed and the agility, and not probably which is more important, not slowing down that agility, not hindering the developers and the cloud ops people from doing what they do. There's no point trying to introduce security that then slows things down. It's not going to be adopted. And so that's essentially what we're talking about here. Increase the agility by increasing that collaboration between the teams. Get them talking together, get them understanding what the overall goal is. The security team then can focus on what they're good at. The developers can focus on what they're good at and reach that common goal of being able to secure the environment and work to the compliance guardrails. So the next slide then, this leads very nicely into what I was talking about then. So Secure Cloud offers a free security assessment of your cloud environments, whether that be the public cloud or whether it be for your Kubernetes clusters. It's very, very simple to do. You simply just go to tufin.com/try-secure cloud. What you'll get when you sign up to this is obviously access to a cloud tenant. It is a SaaS-based product, so very easy. It takes very little time. Within a couple of minutes, you can have set up your tenant. Simply then connect your cloud platform or AWS, Azure, GCP, or your Kubernetes cluster, and you'll start to get visibility. As part of this assessment, you'll receive documentation that will talk you through how to set things up, how to test, how to understand the risks that you can see. So you'll see things, as I already mentioned, like the risky ports, the overly permissive access, internet exposure of things like S3 buckets. You'll also be able to generate in an instant the security policy for your Kubernetes cluster and define the rules that govern the behavior for the east-west traffic within that cluster. will also give you CIS benchmarks for both your public cloud environments as well as the Kubernetes environments. So essentially, it gives you within minutes the ability to test your environment, see where the risks lie, and then start to remediate those problems by the generation of security policy or the creation of public cloud security policy, and essentially understand where the problems are and have a way to then tackle it. There's a great deal of reporting in there. Again, you can use that as a walking around document, if you like, so that you can understand better. But the key thing is very, very simple to set all of this up, and you will get a wealth of information within minutes. Okay. So thank you very much. Ben, is there anything you wanted to add before I sort of sum up and say thank you to everybody?
Sure. No, I think we covered our points, but thanks, Jonathan. Also, I'd like to invite anybody on the call if they have any particular questions. Feel free to ask those questions to us, please. And Jonathan, thank you. It's nice doing another webinar with you. Awesome stuff, as always. Appreciate it.
Thank you, Ben. Thank you, everyone, for listening.
All right, guys, we have plenty of time for question and answer period. So if you do have a question for Ben or for Jonathan, please go ahead and use your question and answer tab and get them on in. Let's see, we've gotten a couple in so far, so let's go ahead and dive into the ones we have. First question, we are starting to use Kubernetes. What should we consider the top priorities when it comes to security?
Do you want me to field that one, Jonathan?
Yeah, you take that one, Ben.
Okay. So if you're just starting to use Kubernetes, obviously there are a lot of capabilities and tools you should be doing. You should be doing container scans, both continuous, whether it's static and also dynamic. You should be able to look inside your cluster and see how those pods or containers are running, what kind of privileges are being used. Those are very traditional tool sets, lots of solutions that will give you that visibility. Secure Cloud is one of those solutions. But also what you want to be able to do is define an application level firewall for those workloads. And that's typically done in a traditional sense by generating a network policy for that particular application that basically controls how that application can run in terms of east-west flows or egresses in and out of the cluster. So that's one of the challenges. We talked about the languages between security and developer. Building a policy like that for some applications can be very laborious, very long and drawn out. It could take quite a bit of time and effort to get that policy written. Tufin Secure Cloud can actually write that policy, give you the initial starting point. Well, here's your application, here's the policy. We actually write the code for you. So you can actually go in and have really direct conversations about each flow for the application with the security review teams. You can edit those policies as well to fit your workloads as promoted through SDLC. And you can carry that policy as code along with your application code as you promote through the FCLC as well. So it's really about trying to automate as much as you can, right, inside of Kubernetes. You don't typically want to be putting hands on keyboards and trying to do break fixes or remediations when you're trying to get these applications to be deployed through automated means. So anywhere we can automate, you should try that. And that's something we definitely would invite you to take a look at Secure Cloud's automation capabilities in that respect.
All right, great. Next question here for you. What kind of resource footprint does Tufin require?
Would you like me to take that one, Ben?
Sure, thanks, Sean.
Okay, so it's very, very light touch. The whole point of Secure Cloud is a SaaS-based product, so you essentially need access to a browser. One of the key things that I mentioned earlier as well is that we leverage the native APIs to give you the visibility. So the native APIs from AWS, Azure, GCP in order to be able to give you the visibility, to be able to show you the map that and the graph that Ben was displaying earlier. So we can tell you that who is talking to whom, the what is talking to what, and also display all of those risks for you. If you're talking about the Kubernetes part, then again, we're not deploying agents, we're not deploying sidecars. We have a small kite module that sits in the control plane, monitors the connectivity within the cluster and reports that back to Secure Cloud. And then again, is telling you in real time the connectivity that's going on, what's accessing what, so that we can then generate those new connections into a security policy for you. So in terms of footprint, very, very light, essentially SaaS product, so there's nothing to install.
All right, great. Another quick reminder, if you've got a question, please go ahead and get it on in. Next question here, do you work with EKS?
I can take that, Jonathan.
Sure.
Okay, great. Yes, actually, we support pretty much any cluster that's pinned to the upstream Kubernetes project. EKS is definitely one of those. Also, AKS, GKE are the more common cloud platform provided, managed platform clusters that you can actually consume. You also support the unmanaged, the roll your own clusters, such as Rancher. OpenShift is another common one. We support all the above. We don't require any specific CNIs. We don't require specific plugins or agents inside the cluster to be able to perform our work, what we provide. The cool thing about our solution as well is we provide, as Jonathan mentioned earlier, benchmark checks. For most managed solutions, a benchmark check is almost unachievable because there's no API server sitting available for you to be able to go against and query what the benchmarks are for that particular cluster. Tufin Secure Cloud Solutions actually provides that report. We figured out a way to get that information to the users themselves. So it's pretty unique and probably the only solution that I'm aware of today that can actually provide that kind of detail to you for your managed clusters as well as your unmanaged. So thank you.
All right, cool. Next question here. Have you seen a model for shared ownership of on-prem and cloud security that works well? That's a good one. I like that.
Would you like me to say that one, Ben?
Sure. Thanks, Tom.
Okay. So we have seen shared ownership model that works well. Yes. Is it the same every time? No. What we haven't yet seen with all the customers that I've worked with. So obviously we work with the Fortune 2000 customers, and we have, spoken with hundreds of different customers around this. No, not one of them seems to have a set model in place for making this work. They just have made it work, and so they've sort of forced the collaboration between the teams and got the job done. In terms of, as I say, there's no one size fits all for this. It all comes down to how do your teams work within your business, and how can you make them, or how can you get them, not make them, how can you get them to talk to one another and reach a common goal.
All right. Those are all the questions that we've gotten in so far. I'm going to go ahead and leave the question and answer tab open to see if we get any last minute questions from the audience. And while we're waiting to see if we do, just a quick reminder that today's event is being recorded. So if you missed any or all of the event, or if you just want to watch it again, you'll have the opportunity to do so. After today's webinar, we will be sending out an email that contains a link to access the webinar on demand. And the webinar is also going to be on the Security Boulevard website, so you can always go look for it there. Just go to securityboulevard.com/webinars, look in the on-demand section, and it should be right there waiting for you. All right, looks like we are not getting any more audience questions in, so I'm going to go ahead and close that out and thank everybody who did submit questions. There were some really great ones there, so thanks very much. If you do have a last minute question, you can still go ahead and submit it to the interface, and if we have a little bit of time at the end, we'll address it. Otherwise, please know that the folks at Tufin will be getting a copy of all of the questions that came in, and I'm sure they'll be more than happy to follow up with you offline following the webinar to get your question answered. Let's see, I did say at the beginning of the webinar that we would be doing a drawing for 4 $25 Amazon gift cards. So without further ado, let's go ahead and do that. Our winners today, first one is Frank K. Congratulations, Frank. Our second winner today is Les P. Congratulations, Les. Our third winner today is Tucker H. Congratulations, Tucker. And our fourth and final winner today is Colby H. Congratulations, Colby. We'll be following up with all 4 of you offline by email to get your Amazon gift card over to you. So please check your inbox. And if you don't see anything there, please check your spam folder. Real quick, wanted to let the audience know that the slides for today's event are in the handout section. So if you want to download them before we close out today's webinar, please feel free. I'll give you guys just a couple seconds or so to go ahead and get that done. And while I thank John and Ben for such a great presentation today, lots of good stuff. So thank you so much, you guys, for your time and your expertise. Really do appreciate it.
You're very welcome. Thank you.
Thank you, Charlene. Thank you.
You bet. You bet. Okay. I also want to thank the audience for joining me today. This is Charlene O'Hanlon, and I am signing off. Have a great day, everybody, and please stay safe.